Okay, has anyone got any questions?
I'm just wondering about separation anxiety, but in this case for younger children. I know a little person who gets really, really upset when she's separated from her main person, and we've tried everything, so we'll explain to her ahead of time, Mum's going and here's what you'll be doing, and so she knows exactly. So it's what's the word for that, when there's no unknowns, and then she'll be coming back, but most of the time she'll get, as soon as you mention to her Mum's going, she'll get really distressed. And she is really young, so I know that's normal, but are there any other coping strategies you can use in those situations?
Yep. A couple of main ones. The main thing is to always make sure that children, when they're in that situation, are handed over to someone who essentially picks up where the parent leaves off. So by that I mean handing over to a person rather than activity. So often, say for example at childcare drop-offs, parents will think that a child needs to be engaged with an activity when they leave, but it's actually more important that they have connected with their next go-to person, their educator. So making sure that you hand over to a person rather than an activity or to a table or a task. And then when you provide that connection and empathic understanding as a parent and say, I understand you wish I didn't have to leave, I'll be back this afternoon, I'll give you a cuddle now, and then I'll hand you over to your teacher, for example, who can give you a cuddle and stick with you till you're feeling better. Then it's the educator's role, or whomever might be picking up thereafter, to essentially pick up and say, and take the child and continue to meet that need for comfort until it's no longer required. So the educator or the other significant adult would say, I understand you wish Mummy didn't have to leave, I understand, you can stick with me until you're feeling better. So there's that consistency in how that need for comfort is met across both the person leaving and the person stepping in. And the second thing to mention is to allow children opportunities to practice. When they are feeling playful and connected with you and they're wired to learn, that's when you can practice these situations. And particularly role play practice with little children can be really helpful in these situations. Actually practicing goodbyes, which I've done with my own children before, and saying, okay, so when I leave, this is how we're going to do it. I'll give you a cuddle, we'll say our goodbyes, and then you can have a cuddle with whoever it is that you're being left with. Let's actually have a practice. Because when children are wired to learn and they have opportunities to practice, then they're more likely to be successful when that situation, next comes around.
Is that where distraction doesn't actually work in those situations?
Yeah. I mean, distraction can mean it can mean different things to different people. So if you're saying, okay, you're upset, check out the plane going past, I'm about to leg it, that's not helpful for children. That's just going to invoke panic every time you even look like you might be about to leave, and they feel like they need to monitor you all the time to make sure you don't do that point and dash thing again. Distraction, if you're moving a child on to an activity that you need to move on to, is entirely reasonable as long as you're first providing that connection empathy. So if you say, I understand you're still feeling sad and you want to stick with me, that's fine, but I need to go and check on your friend over there who's fallen down, so let's stick together and we can both check on your friend. So moving along is fine, provided you first meet that need for connection empathy that children really need when they're distressed in that situation.
What's sort of the top general advice that you'd give someone around stress management with their children for younger children? So I've got a 2-year-old, but sort of around that sort of age.
Yeah.
How do you, what's the top advice, and then where would you go to find out more about that?
So in terms of parents, the parent being stressed or the child being stressed?
So you mentioned stress management techniques. So what's your go-to kind of stress management techniques that you would tell people about, and then how would I find out more about that sort of thing and other techniques?
Yep. So stress is really helpful for children to experience, provided it's manageable for their developmental age, and provided you're available as their sort of buffer to be able to help them to manage that. So children throughout, every day are experiencing stressful situations. So even negotiating bedtime or falling over in the playground or having a toy snatched off them at playgroup, all those situations can be stressful for a child. having to be told that they need to wear a hat outside when they hate wearing hats. All those situations can be stressful to an extent for a child, but they're all really good learning for children. They learn that certain things happen that might not always go their way, and they learn that they have to manage those situations, even when those situations are really disappointing for them. So the main thing is to encourage parents not to dismiss their children in those situations, but to provide that connection and empathy. Say, I know you're feeling disappointed that we couldn't buy that toy in the shop. I know, I wish I could buy everything in the shops too. Providing that connection, empathy, and putting words to their experience so that ultimately children can put their own experience into words is really helpful, and allowing children to feel disappointed, to feel challenged, to feel bored, because they are gaining practice and valuable stress management skills as they tolerate those situations that will obviously bode them well for life. So that certainly ties into the topic of resilience, which we cover in the other mat time episode, but which I also cover in a lot of detail in my Dose of Awesomeness advice packs, which parents are welcome to access online anytime.
I have a question. You talked about two other types of anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress and panic disorder. What's panic disorder?
So panic disorder is a disorder that tends to occur more often in older children and adults, which is why I didn't go into it in too much detail in this episode. It's an disorder in which the anxiety is felt very physically. So your heart rate speeds up, your breathing rate speeds up, you can feel lightheaded or dizzy, and often people have an experience that they're either going to die or they're going mad. That's often how it's perceived, because these things, it can just sort of come on quite unexpectedly and can be really, really frightening for someone. Now the problem is, once you've had one panic episode that comes out of the blue, it increases your baseline level of anxiety because you're now very worried about having another one. And because you've got that raised baseline level of anxiety, you're more likely to be tipped over into another panic state. So it's really about teaching children or older children or adults how to manage their anxiety as soon as it begins, so that you can sort of quell those episodes early and eventually break that cycle.
With some of the disorders like OCD, and there's one where you said you get physically sick, do they hereditary? Did you just have those? Or is it something that's been caused from a parenting style or an experience?
It's a great question. So anxiety in general is considered, in terms of that problematic anxiety we talked about, or those anxiety disorders, tend to be multifactorial. And you know, sometimes we can't point a finger at one particular thing and say it was that. There's certainly a genetic component. So as an adult, if you have an anxiety disorder, then your kids would carry a greater genetic risk of having an anxiety disorder, same as with many illnesses and conditions in life. For some children, temperament plays a role. So we know that some children are those sort of highly sensitive souls just by virtue of their temperament. It's just the qualities of their personality that they've been born with. So those highly sensitive souls who tend to think more deeply about situations and worry about all the what ifs, that can be a trait that's been with them since they were born, and those kids are more prone to worry. For other children, they might have experienced really traumatic events in their life which has made them more prone to stress. And for other children, there's a learned component as well. So for example, if you were to jump so high you hit your head on the ceiling every time you saw a spider, then children will naturally learn that spiders are incredibly dangerous and fear-inducing, and that they should respond similarly. So there can be a learned component to anxiety too, which is one of the reasons I guess we have to, another motivation to, I guess, get on top of our own anxiety as parents, both for ourselves but also for our children.
You mentioned having the importance of having scheduled or sort of regular downtime for children. Can you talk about what that looks like? Sort of, you know, you said there's good downtime and then bad downtime. You mentioned screen time is often replaced. What does good downtime look like?
I think it's just providing the kids with opportunities to be bored and come up with their own activities. I think often we tend as parents now to fill the gaps, you know, those gaps that might have otherwise been used by the child to do anything really. Thumb through a book or gaze at clouds or anything, or just be bored. There's a tendency to sort of fill the gaps with screen time and allow a child to sort of be passive consumers of screen time, whereas that's not the best use of their time. Children need practice being bored. My kids actually very rarely let me know that they're bored, and the couple of times that they have, I've just explained that boredom is just those brief moments before you come up with another good idea of something to do. But teaching children that they are very capable of coming up with a game or coming up with an activity or wanting to explore in the garden, whatever it might be, they can come up with their own activities that provides them with more than passive screen time could ever offer. My kids make so much out of boxes. It's always, boxes are often there.
I was sort of wondering what, like, in terms of, because Cora has a lot of downtime.
Yeah.
Like, Angel B, baking or something like that, and Cora's just playing around.
Yeah.
But she's got heaps of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, I was just wondering, like...
Oh, no, that's okay.
Yeah.
It's just you as a parent not filling all their time.
Yeah.
No, if they're playing or they come up with an idea to play I Spy with you while you're cooking or anything that's led by them, that's downtime. Anything that's led by you in terms of booking into back-to-back swimming, dance, soccer lessons, and then filling the gaps with screens, there's just no downtime for kids then if they haven't been able to come up with their own activities.
Do you have any idea of I mean, this is a very vague and hard question to answer, but a rough, what does balance look like to you? I guess for you specifically it might be easier to answer. So rough schedule sort of.
Yeah, you know what, it often depends on your child as well. Some kids can manage more than others. Some kids are just, by virtue of their temperament, more physically active kids and are driven to do more. Some of my children are all actually quite different in how much they want to do and how much they can cope with. And, that's a tricky thing of being a parent, is balancing the right amount for each of your very different children. But look, my children do one after-school activity a week, and the rest of the time they've chosen to be able to come home and play or read or just chill out. And that works for our family. But it'll be different for all different temperament types and different families.
Cool, thanks.
How do you know what a real anxiety is versus maybe just not wanting to go to bed, or just can't find the right teddy,
Yeah. So what do you mean in terms of why would you call it anxiety versus something else?
If a child says they don't want to turn the lights off because they're scared of the dark.
Oh, okay.
But maybe they just don't want to go to sleep.
Yeah.
And they're playing on it.
Yeah. How do you know when they're,
When does that actual anxiety become attention seeking? Just as an attention seeking strategy?
I think it depends if it's sustained or not. So if it's a day where you've worked a long day and you come home and your child is suddenly thinking of 1,001 reasons why you shouldn't leave them in their room at night because they want to keep connecting with you, and clinically in our conversations with parents we would talk about connection seeking rather than attention seeking, because it's more helpful to think about that, because it's what it is. They just want to connect with you. And they'll think of 101 reasons, ways to be able to do that. I guess you've got to consider the context, whether this is a repeated theme or whether it's a sustained thing. And again, I guess if you are confused about it, then picking those times which are unrelated to the event, when you're having a nice play, throwing a ball together the next day, and that's when you can have those conversations saying, hey, last night when you said you were, scared of the dark, were you really scared of the dark, or do you just want me to hang out with you a little bit longer? That's the times you can have those conversations unrelated to the event, where you're probably more likely to get a more helpful response, perhaps, that can then guide you next time. Yeah.
You talk about, role playing a good way to help overcome something. What if they're 11? You still role play?
Yeah, you can. It depends on your child. Yeah, it depends. Or at 11, you can just talk to them about it. Yeah. And say, gosh, it sounds like a pretty tricky situation that you're in with your friend. What options have you come up with? Do you actually want to have a practice? Like, if I said this to you, what could you say? You can do it without the whole, okay, let's now get up and role play. You could just play it out in conversation.
If it's something that I feel should have been dealt with years ago and it's dragged out and now it seems ridiculous.
Yeah.
Because it's about food.
Yeah.
So I think it's like a phobia now.
Yeah.
So are there techniques you deal with that?
Yeah.
Because it obviously is an anxiety.
Yeah. I think in those situations where they've become a bit of a habit and heels have been dug in and it feels hard to break those habits, one of the most helpful things I've found with children is to really make sure you align with your child against the problem. So what you don't want to do is to line yourself up against your child, because then you have those power struggles that never go well for anyone. So in those situations, it's much better to be able to say, gosh, you and I find mealtimes pretty tricky. And we both wish we didn't. So you're aligning with your child. We both wish we didn't, because it's, we love hanging out together, and it's actually a really nice time to spend time together. So what can we do to make mealtimes better? What are your ideas? Because I've got a couple of ideas. I'm just wondering if you have as well, and maybe we'll both work on those to make mealtimes a bit better. But again, it's probably better to do that, have that conversation, not at mealtime. At another time when you're feeling connected and, on the same page. And it might even be lying in bed, jumping in beside them in bed one night and say, hey, I just want to have a talk to you about something. Because you and I, we're often apart from each other during the day. I love the time we spend together. I know you and I both want it to be as good as it can be, so this is something I was thinking of that we could both work on. What are your ideas? And really aligning with your child against the problem.
Good answer.
Yeah.
In terms of anxiety, there are no different things can induce anxiety, and I know like my daughter at the moment, she's got 2 new siblings.
Yeah.
So that's created quite a bit of anxiety for her.
Yeah.
How easy is it for her though does it say situation specific, or is it likely to generalise?
So can you give me an example of how that's played out in terms of anxiety?
She'll have moments where she'll feel like she's not part of the family. She's had dreams about being kidnapped or being taken by another family member to live at their house.
Yeah.
And that she'll wake up and she'll be quite upset because she's like, but I don't want to live with them, I want to live with you.
Yeah.
And we're reassuring her, like, no, that's not going to happen with us. You're here as long as you want to be.
Yeah.
And it's something that's very much started since the siblings have come home.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I guess our concern with it is like, how likely is that to then start to induce anxiety in other situations that aren't specifically related to that?
Yeah.
So,
How old's your daughter?
She's 4.
4.
I think, hearing that, I guess the thing that I would think about is that your little one's feeling like she's becoming less and less part of your family. I would wonder whether that's, obviously that's not the case and she's well loved, but that might be playing in her mind, is that her family is now irrevocably changed and that she's not feeling as much a part of it as she once was, perhaps. So I guess if that's the case, I'd be less inclined to worry that anxiety is going to generalise, and more inclined to think about it as a period of adjustment in which your main role is really to connect with her and bring her in as much as you can, so that she feels like, even though her family's changed, she's still very much part of it. So taking opportunities to connect with her, to touch her, even at breakfast, if you're reaching across her to get the breakfast cereal, popping a hand on her back. Each time you go past her, kiss her on the head. Say things like, gee, our family's so much better with you in it, or we love you being part of our family, or aren't your little brothers or sisters lucky to have you as a big sister? Taking those moments to connect with her, really highlighting all the wonderful qualities that she brings, not sort of external stuff like, gee, I like your shoes, but isn't it wonderful that you're so kind, and gee, you're funny, or you're so imaginative, whatever it might be. Really take time to delight in her, let your face light up, your eyes light up when she walks in, so that she feels very much drawn in and part of your, albeit now different, family. And take the time too to foster that bond between her and her siblings. One of the ways I did this with my children, when there was a new addition, each time there's a new addition, was having my older children do smiling practice with my babies, because we all know it takes a while for babies to learn how to smile. So one of the things I would say to my older child was, hey, can I get your help? Because babies don't actually know how to smile. It's one of the many things we have to teach them, and you're a really good teacher and you've got a beautiful smile. So can you sit here with me and actually do some smiling practice with our baby? And it was a really nice way for the sibling and the baby to connect. And inevitably it's rewarded, because the baby pretty soon after starts smiling back at them, and it's very reinforcing for that bond. But just I guess you've got to think creatively about lots of different ways you can bring her in, so that it's not a situation where you're taking her away and leaving mum with babies or whatever it might be, albeit to, give babies and mum a break. Think about things you can do together or to bring her in as often as you can. Yeah, it's a tricky time. How old are your babies?
They're coming up, they're just past 6 months.
Yeah, okay.
Or coming up 6 months.
Yeah. Yeah, so just making sure she's in as much as possible. That delight's really important. And they say, so delight's communicated non-verbally and is the way your eyes light up and your face lights up and your body turns towards someone when you're with them. It's thought to be the basis of self-esteem development for children. So if she's, even as she gets up in the morning, if she's delighted in, it's a beautiful way for her to start coming into the room and seeing that her parents absolutely still delight in her being there, even though, family's a little different now. Even though you will have had 0 sleep and it's hard to delight in anything other than coffee. But you know what I mean, just making sure those little moments of connection with your daughter happen because they really add up to a lot. Yeah.
I have one. As parents and teachers, how do you support children who are suffering from anxiety with something that you are also feeling? For example, like if you're in a big earthquake or a car accident, or you need to look after yourself as well. But if your fear is genuine, do you hide it, or what do you suggest?
No, I think there's value in that. There's value for children to understand that it's normal to feel anxious about things like that. That is absolutely normal to feel anxious about earthquakes if you've just been through one and it was scary. And it's helpful for them to know that even the grown-ups are a bit scared. But don't just leave it at that. It would be more helpful to say, gosh, I found that earthquake scary too, did you? Yeah, no, we both did. In fact, everyone did. It's normal to feel a bit scared in an earthquake. But you know what? We're all okay. Provide some sort of context and story around it and provide some personal examples of what you did to help yourself manage your anxiety, if you can. Or if not you, then draw on someone else's experience. Say, I know someone who went to talk to someone about it and realised that everyone just felt worried, but it passed. Lots of scary things happen in life, but it passes. You might find, if it's too much to have that conversation, you might find bringing in storybooks about it are a more helpful way to sort of discuss that topic without drawing on your own experience if you're finding that too challenging. And there are lots of storybooks written about anxiety or various situations that children might find anxious that might be helpful in that situation. Yeah.